This is great to see everybody. I really appreciate everybody being here tonight. The older I get, the more I realize the wisdom of my father, who told me often as a teenager that we are nothing without those that come before us and those that work with us. In fact, I think his exact words to me as a 16-year-old were, "Why, you ungrateful little..." But I know what he meant, because really tonight is an exercise in gratitude for everybody who has been part of making this happen. I am struck every time I go around the country and actually around the world at how much attention there is on what's happened here in Houston. And that's happened because of, well, first and foremost, the staff, most of you who are here. And please, give yourself a hand. I can't say enough for the staff that are here. You come in every day, you deal with the evil of the world, you try and do an objective, scientific job of it, and you come back and you do it again. Thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge Mayor Turner, who's here with us tonight. I appreciate your being here, and I appreciate the political courage that actually doing something different with a crime laboratory means. And also former Mayor Denise Parker, who was part of starting this. This is really unusual in the country to actually do something different with a crime laboratory, and that takes real courage. So thank you. I appreciate it. And that list is also Chief Slinker, because really this started as an HPD idea. For all of the issues that HPD had, it was HPD that brought this concept up. And so Matt, I really appreciate what you've done. I appreciate the partnership. It's been good to work with you, and I look forward to working with you more. We have several of our current board members. We have a few of our former board members, but certainly our former chair, Scott Hochberg, who's here, and Nicole Caceres, our current chair. We couldn't do this without you two. Thank you very much. We also have with us tonight Representative Kalani, who's a new state legislator, actually in my district, so thank you. I appreciate you being here tonight. She's got a bill that she's carried in the House for video testimony, authorizing video testimony around the state, which will be a boon to laboratories, so I thank you for your work on that. I really also appreciate other members of the city, Andy Aiken, I don't know if Stephen David is here, but all of the people in the city, Chris Ferrani, all of the work that everybody has done, all of these things are necessary for us to get there. This is a really unique thing. It has been probably, hands down, one of the hardest things I've ever tried to do is working with this laboratory, but it has been enormously gratifying. And I appreciate very much everything that everybody has done with this. So with that, Ms. Mayor, I'll turn it over to you. I appreciate your being here tonight.
Let me thank Dr. Peter Stout for his leadership over the Houston Forensic Science Center. He's done, I guess I made a great job. And I've worked with him since I've been mayor, and I'm certainly impressed by his leadership. So look, we thank everybody, please. Dr. Peter Stout, please. Let me start off by thanking and acknowledging Representative Kalani. We need so much in the legislature, so I'm going to start off with you tonight. Thank you for being here and for the leadership that you are showing in the legislature, and look forward to working with you as we move forward. There are a couple of bills in the legislature that we need to die. I'm not going to be, bashful. HB 2, Senate Bill 1152. If they just die and don't go to a forensic science center, that's fine. They just don't need to pass. Let me acknowledge former State Representative Scott Hochberg, because when both of us were in the legislature, and both of us were hearing about things with the Houston crime line, Crime Center and all the problems that they were facing. And then Scott stepped away from the legislature, became chair of the Houston Forensic Science Center, the first chair under the new structure, and just did a yeoman's job. And so, just like Dr. Stout said, you know, we're all standing on the shoulders of someone who preceded us. And so I certainly want to acknowledge his leadership and the foundation that he laid, especially when we are celebrating the successes of where it is today. So, Scott, thank you, man. And quite frankly, I would say to you, one of the most brilliant persons that I know. I mean, and I mean that, no, an incredible mind. And then I'm going to come back to the current chair a little bit later on. Chief Slinker, thank you, so very much. HPD, Dr. Stout kind of laid it out. But for HPD to be on the forefront of the thinking for a new structure speaks volumes in and of itself. And so let me thank HPD, let me thank you on your leadership. I work with you directly on the Houston Forensic Science Center, so thank you so very, very much for what you do, what y'all have done. And even in her absence, I do want to acknowledge former Mayor Denise Parker, because it was under her leadership that the structural change occurred. And it's not easy to start something new, and especially to make a structural change. It does take some guts to do that, especially when it was facing some turbulent times. Now, you don't know what the outcome will be. If you do it and it doesn't work, you own it. And if you do it and it does work, great. But to be able to do it not knowing what the outcome will be speaks volumes for her leadership. So even in her absence, please join me in acknowledging and thanking former Mayor Denise. I want to thank John Kingman for his generous donation that made the anniversary party possible. And thank the board. I do want to thank the board members and the staff who have contributed and for the work that they have done. I don't care who's at the top. If you don't have good people working for you, excellent board members, and a dedicated staff, things just don't get there. So I want to thank them. And I'm proud and excited that we have gotten to this point. Many will remember the years when the HPD Crime Lab bounced from scandal to scandal, and despite millions of dollars, time, and resources dedicated to improvement and some success there, it could still not get out from under the shadow of the past to regain public trust. I think Mike Bromwich wrote a very big report and on it, and it's kind of interesting. Mike and I re-met again tonight. Mike and I were at Harvard Law School together, and so it's good to have him back here, and he'll be speaking later on. So Mike, good to see you. Now the bold, progressive move to make the crime lab independent has proven to be a success. Just what was needed to improve operations, rebuild public trust, and make Houston's crime lab a national and international model for quality forensics. And I want to give special thanks to the board, to the staff, but I want to give special thanks also to Nicole Caceres, the current board chairwoman, who has been a part of this. In fact, Nicole has been a part of the Houston Forensic Science Center from the beginning, since 2012. And then she succeeded Scott in being the chair right around 2015. And she has been the chair up to this point in time. And I want to thank her for her leadership, for her commitment, her dedication. She came to see me a little over a year ago, Andy. She came to see us, and she was telling me that she saw the end of her interstate, so to speak, that she was going to exit and leave as being chair of the Houston Forensic Science Center. A lot was going on at the university, and she said, Mayor, I think this is going to be it, and that was going to be a year ago. There are some people who, when they tell you that they're going to leave, you thank them for their service and wish them well. And you pretend like you will miss them. There are some people when they tell you that they are looking at leaving, you just look back at them and act like you do not hear them. When Nicole came, I did not hear her. And what I said is that if you need me to make a call to the university to give her more flexibility, I would be more than willing to make that call to the university. But I asked her not to leave, not at that point in time. And to her credit, she chose to stay on board and said, you know, Mayor, that I will stay to work on the transition to move the Houston for Ryan Center, working with Dr. Stout from where it was then up until this point now. And she has done with her leadership an incredible job. And I want you to know, not only is the city grateful, but this mayor is very grateful for the commitment that you have made to the Houston Forensic Science Center. Please give it up to Nicole. Nicole is scheduled to leave this position in July after years of volunteering time, energy, and support to ensure Houston Forensic Science Center's long-term success. She told me again tonight that she intends to leave in July. Her husband was standing close by. He heard her. And she said, Mayor, please, you know, you are listening to me, right? You know, there are some things I just have to pray on. I will continue to pray on. We'll talk again. Full international accreditation in all sections, including the crime lab, in terms of successes that have taken place. A completely civilian staff. And Chief Slicker, you and I, and Dr. Staub, you've talked about police being a part of the Houston Forensic Science Center. Andy, I just got to stop and give Andy just special credit. He's been very hands-on with the Houston Forensic Science Center and paid very close attention to it and has provided a great deal of leadership. So please, Andy, thank you so very much. Full international accreditation in all sections, a quality system that includes blind testing that is getting Houston national and international recognition. And when the Houston Forensic Science Center took over in 2014, it inherited a backlog, Scott, then of over 12,000 requests across disciplines. It now has about only 2,000 requests that are over 30 days old. In 2014, the turnaround time exceeded 150 days. For some requests, it took 18 months to get a forensic result. Today, the Houston Forensic Science Center has an average turnaround time of between 35 and 40 days. Transparency has become parts of its mission, with backlog numbers, turnaround times, and quality incidents readily available on the Houston Forensic Science Center website. Efficiencies that would have allowed it to operate on a flat budget despite a 30% increase in requests for service. In my first year, Peter, you all came to me and you asked me for additional money. You know, I was reluctant to give it. And then when we were preparing for the budget the following year, you do not know this, but I told the finance department to put some additional dollars in the budget for the Houston Forensic Science Center. I was anticipating that you all were going to come back and ask me for some additional dollars. So I was trying to get ahead of you. And I just put it in the budget, anticipating that you would come. You never came. I thank you for it. And now in order to pay for Proposition B, I'm just being fully transparent tonight. Please do not come. I have taken those dollars and I set aside and put them on Proposition B. And God is good. And finally, when we found a cost-neutral facility option that allows Houston's crime lab to finally have a laboratory specifically designed for forensic work, we have done that. And when I toured the facility, along with Chief Acevedo, Chief Slinker, there was no question, you were crowded, needed more space. Now we have a new location, again, under the leadership of the chair, the board, Dr. Peter Stout, and it was very instrumental on that. We've made tremendous progress. And this is all in just 5 years. Imagine what the future holds. This is a great city because it has great people. I want to thank all of you for making it possible. And we are standing on the shoulders of those who went before, just as others in the future will stand on the shoulders of those of us who are here now. Thank you, sir.
All right, before I introduce Mike Bromwich, I did want to take a few minutes before the mayor escapes here because I've got to say thank you to Nicole. Nicole has been one of the true honors of my life to work with you. We'll see if I can make it through this all right here. Nicole's been a rock, graceful and with a steel will through hard times. She's held us accountable. She has stood by with hard times, with good times, and I have been trying to think how to do something that is a little unique. So, you all know I'm a big nerd. I'm also a wood nerd, so I'm a woodworker nerd, and I drive back and forth to Austin a lot these days. There's a guy who does reclaimed lumber on the road out to Austin, and he has these trees that came from a dredging operation in Louisiana. So the tree that I've got is a piece of cypress that was an old growth tree 1,000 years ago. So this tree was a good 400 years when it fell in a cypress mangrove somewhere in Louisiana 1,000 years ago. So this tree was growing at the time that Charlemagne was crowned. This tree was growing at the time that Alfred the Great drove the Vikings from England. This tree was growing at the time of the golden age of Islam that gave us algebra and the scientific method. So, you know, trees are something that has stood as a silent sentinel over our successes and our failures. And I was asked to use a quote from Yeats, since we have an Irishman here with us, that, you know, trees have been used as a metaphor in a lot of different things, but the rose tree that is in Yeats' poem that describes the struggle for Irish independence. And, you know, I suppose, not to overextend a metaphor, but that the struggle of what HFSC is a similar great endeavor in humanity. So as plain can be, there's nothing but our own red blood can make a red rose tree. So Nicole, thank you for your blood, your sweat, your tears, your sleepless nights, your texts from me in the middle of the night. I can think of no better partner in this, but thank you. Now the part I dropped there, you know it has to be something for me because it comes with data. I have the radiocarbon dating of that tree, so. Yeah, everybody knows that everything comes with data with me. So our next speaker is Mike Bromwich. Michael Bromwich started his career as the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. So a long, illustrious career. I think most recently, many of you may know him as the attorney with Christine Blasey Ford, her testimony. He's also been oversight of numerous corporations and corporate settlements there, but here in Houston, probably most known for the Bromwich Report, actually in forensics. I think the Bromwich Report, the Swecker Report in North Carolina, and the NAS Report at the national level are three that everybody in forensics knows. I joke that I know people in Africa who know the situation of Houston because I do know people in Africa who know the situation of Houston, and that's largely because of the Bromwich Report. So I am pleased to introduce Michael Bromwich to come full circle on this, because he was certainly part of the start of this. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be here with all of you. We've got some very familiar faces that I see, including Linkard and Scott, and I think my oldest acquaintance is Mayor Turner, who, as he mentioned, went to law school together. I think he and I both had a little more hair at the time, but he's done reasonably well, and it's great to see him. So, let me talk about a few things, and let me start with my history with forensic science. I was a federal prosecutor even before I was an inspector general. I was a federal prosecutor in New York, and then with the Iran-Contra special prosecutor in Washington, D.C. in the late 80s. And I dealt with some forensic science. I dealt with some forensic witnesses, chemists who had done drug analysis, handwriting experts, which more and more people don't view as forensic science as much as they used to. And I can tell you from the perspective of somebody who prosecuted cases using some forensic witnesses, we had an odd, uninquiring attitude towards it. We viewed forensic witnesses as really the equivalent of kind of wind-up toys. No disrespect intended, but instead it reflected the fact that we didn't understand the science behind it, and therefore were not constructive consumers of it. And that was true, I think, of my entire generation of prosecutors, and it typified their attitude toward forensic science. We had no forensic science literacy. A lot of that has extended to this day, although I think it's gotten better. So let me tell you about my awakening to the importance and the fallibility of forensic science. As Peter mentioned, I was Inspector General for the Department of Justice from 1994 to 1999. Probably the most significant investigation I handled was an investigation into the FBI lab. And that began with a whistleblower, a chemist inside the FBI lab, who started writing letters, and kept writing letters, and kept writing letters, to the point where I think my agency received in the end something like 150 letters from Dr. Frederick Whitehurst complaining about misconduct, perjury, mishandling of scientific evidence, but more than anything else, sheer scientific incompetence in the lab. And really based on complaints that began with him, we looked into some of the most prominent explosives-related cases of the previous 15 years. The assassination of Judge Vance, Court of Appeals judge. The 1993 World Trade Center bombing case. The attempted assassination of George H.W. Bush 3 or 4 months after he left the presidency in Kuwait. And most notably, and that's a list of notable cases, the Oklahoma City bombing case in 1995. The FBI lab was viewed as the gold standard in forensic lab work. We brought in a number of outside forensic experts, explosives experts from all over the world. One from Northern Ireland, one from the RCMP in Canada, and 3 from the United States. And they looked closely at these cases, and they found that the emperor had no clothes, and that the FBI forensics work, as vaunted as it was, the high esteem in which it was held, was done in many cases in a completely unscientific way, really unworthy of the name of science. So we spent a couple of years doing that investigation, and the scales really fell from my eyes about how forensic science was practiced in the FBI. And because the FBI had taught so many of the specialties to state and local labs all over the country, it was like an infection in the bloodstream, and it had spread throughout the country. So what did we find as a result of that investigation? We found deep-seated problems in the way that the FBI handled a large number of cases. And we made a number of recommendations, and we stressed that the mission had to be to provide reliable, objective, scientific results, that examiners needed to have scientific backgrounds to a shocking degree in the FBI. They did not. The need for top managers in that lab to have scientific backgrounds, for everyone in the lab to recognize the limits of their expertise, the need for ongoing reviews by outside entities, and the need for greater quality assurance. And as Peter has suggested in the context of the work we did on HPD, equally so in the work we did on the FBI lab, it was not only a seminal moment for me, but I think for many, many other people, because it showed the vulnerability and the fallibility of forensic science because of a combination of things: bad recruiting, bad training, inadequate supervision, poor top management, and frankly, the scientific illiteracy of prosecutors, defense lawyers, and judges. So fast forward to the early 2000s, and Houston, you had a problem. In late 2002, a 3-month-long investigation by a local television station disclosed that there were huge problems in the Houston crime lab, focusing on DNA and serology. And there were a series of steps that were taken starting in late 2002. There was an initial review by the Department of Public Safety that led to the closure of the DNA section of the lab in late 2002. And there was an attempt, and Captain Slinker, who was then, or Chief Slinker, who was then a sergeant, was involved in that. There was an attempt to identify all the cases in which DNA had been used, and it was upwards of 400 cases that required retesting. So there were a series of steps. Some temporary managers were brought in, outside consultants were brought in, but those steps really produced more questions than answers. There were, at the time, 2 highly publicized exonerations, one involving George Rodriguez, one involving Josiah Sutton. And the city realized it had to do something more than it had already done. And so in the fall of 2004, then Chief Harold Hurt called for an outside investigation, an independent review of the crime lab. And they set up, the city, the mayor, Mayor White at the time, and the chief set up a very interesting and I think very smart structure. They created what they called a stakeholder committee. And that was made up of public officials, scientists, academics, civil rights advocates, and lawyers. And the 2 public officials on the stakeholders committee, one was Mayor Parker, who was then the comptroller of the city. The other one was Councilman Adrian Garcia. And they reviewed all the applicants who expressed interest in doing the investigation, and we were lucky enough to be selected. We began our work in March of 2005, and we conducted an extensive, and as the city later concluded, expensive investigation. Our mandate was broad. We were asked to examine all aspects of the crime lab's work, all of the management and operational issues that had led to the crisis of confidence in the lab, to identify cases of potential injustice that had been created by the problems in the lab, and to focus on the broad range of casework from 1998 to 2004, so a 6-year period across the board, and then to formulate recommendations for reform. So in the end, we reviewed 3,500 cases altogether across the full spectrum of the lab's work: DNA, serology, toxicology, firearms, trace evidence, and at that time, question documents. And the conclusions after a 2-year review were that there had been massive problems with the DNA and serology work, going back actually to the early 1980s. And with the approval of the Stakeholders Committee, we went back that far because the serology work was so deeply flawed that we became concerned that there were people still in prison who were there because of flawed serology. So we found that the causes of the failure were manifold: lack of support and resources, ineffective top management, inadequate quality control, and quality assurance. And our recommendations really focused on what we viewed as the core problems that needed to be addressed: funding, staffing, quality assurance, and very importantly, improved information systems, which isn't glamorous, but boy is it important. So what's interesting, sort of looking back from the distance, it's 12 years since we completed our report, is that our crime lab review really dovetailed with national currents. It wasn't limited to Houston, because the Houston work was really part of the larger fabric of what I think it's fair to call a national awakening of both the importance and the vulnerability of forensic science. The work of the Innocence Project, and we have Sarah Chu from the Innocence Project here today. Innocence Projects here in Texas and all around the country really produced the recognition that flawed forensic science was an epidemic and a major contributor to wrongful convictions around the country. I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to take a look at the National Registry of Exonerations. It's on the web. It's a fabulous source of information. And it brings together all of the exonerations in this country since 1989. There have been more than 2,400 exonerations since 1989 alone. More than 21,000 years total of wrongful imprisonment resulting from those cases. And the detailed review of those cases has disclosed multiple causes of those wrongful convictions: mistaken witness identification, perjury or false accusations, false confessions, official misconduct, but also forensic evidence problems. And the data on that website, which is the product of incredibly detailed and serious work by multiple universities, is that false or misleading forensic evidence is the cause of fully a quarter of the wrongful convictions that have taken place. And many, and I know this includes Nicole, think that's an undercount, and that buried in some of the other cases that identify other causes are also problems with the forensic science. So it became clearer and clearer, particularly in the mid-2000s, that this was not a Houston-based problem. This was a national problem. And it was recognized all over the country, and importantly in Washington. And so Congress actually did some work back then, not much, but some. And at the end of 2005, they appropriated funding to what became the National Academy of Sciences report on forensic science. So implementation began of that project at the end of 2006. Hearings were held in 2007, 2008. I was actually asked to testify Woods Hole, Massachusetts, on the work that I had done here. And the report was published in 2009. A seminal event in forensic science, and opening people's eyes and minds to some of the challenges that were faced. The report in 2009, as I think most of you know, is called Strengthening Forensic Science in the U.S., A Path Forward. And one of the recommendations in that report was for the independence of forensic laboratories. And I'll read you the recommendation. To improve the scientific bases of forensic science examination and to maximize independence from or autonomy within the law enforcement community, Congress should authorize and appropriate incentive funds to the National Institute of Forensic Science for allocation to state and local jurisdictions for the purpose of removing all public forensic laboratories and facilities from the administrative control of law enforcement agencies or prosecutors' offices. That was embraced in principle, but only implemented here. So now we turn to more modern history here, which everyone in this room should be extremely proud of. Because of some continuing issues with the crime lab, former Mayor Parker, who was on our stakeholders committee, and I think that was a formative experience for her. One of her campaign issues in her 2011 re-election campaign was to create an independent forensic lab. And in 2012, she created the transition team to separate forensic functions from Houston Police Department. It was approved by the City Council in June 2012. 9-member board was appointed. And at the invitation of Scott Hochberg, I was invited back to take a look to see whether the recommendations that we made in 2007 had been implemented. And to our satisfaction and a little bit our surprise, most of them had been. Didn't solve all of the problems, but solved many of them. And most importantly, the lab had conscientiously tracked the recommendations and made a good faith effort to implement them. So there was no question when we delivered that report in January of 2014 that the lab had made very substantial progress. And we said, this is the last paragraph of that report. We said that the conclusion to our 2007 report had expressed concern that without sustained effort and attention, the crime lab would not be able to perform, quote, consistently competent and reliable forensic science analysis, and that, quote, HPD in the city must make sure that the needs of the lab were never again ignored, unquote. And then we noted Mayor Parker's landmark decision to create the Houston Forensic Science Center and the ongoing efforts to recruit top-flight executive personnel to oversee the forensic operations of HPD, most of which are currently still housed in the crime lab, are hopeful signs that forensic services will receive the attention and resources that they so richly deserve. So, a quick survey that all of you know better than I do of the last 5 years. After close to 2 years of planning and transition, the Houston Forensic Science Center was born on April 3rd, 2014. We're all here to celebrate the glorious 5th year anniversary of an agency that has established a new model for independent labs. The Forensic Science Center has brought together former HPD crime lab and elements of the IDENT division of the Houston Police Department. So it includes work in forensic biology, latent prints, toxicology, firearms, digital and multimedia, and crime scene. And the founding principles of the Forensic Science Center are to serve HPD, prosecutors, and the defense bar as equal customers, and to become and be a science and technology-based entity, not a component of a law enforcement organization. I was lucky enough to spend yesterday afternoon with Nicole and Peter. I can't tell you how impressed I am with their commitment to the principles of operating an independent crime lab and the commitment of other people they introduced me to during the tour of both the old facilities and the new facilities. You are here setting an example that other cities and governmental units should follow, and I hope to follow. It's obviously not without risks, and it's certainly not without challenges. But the promise of making a crucial component of the criminal justice system more competent, more independent, and more neutral, it's true to the principles of objective science and a fair and just criminal justice system. In my view, the Forensic Science Center here is making one of the most notable and noble efforts to reach the goals that we all should aspire to in a criminal justice system. And I have the strong view that it's worthy of everyone's moral and financial support. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to see so many old faces and many new faces. Thank you very much.
I'm always getting grief. Well, I thank you all for that. I think we've got dinner got salads down, just kind of where we're at on this. Yep, start serving that. We'll let everybody get going with that, and then I've got a few awards for 5-year employees and some things like that, but we can get started with dinner. But I thank everybody for the speakers that are here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being here. And I'll be back here in just a few minutes after we kind of get going with dinner.